In this tutorial, I'm going to talk more in depth about layer styles. In one of the previous tutorials, I had shown you how to add a stroke using a layer style. If you remember correctly, you can either go down here to your FX box at the bottom of your layers palette, click this, then click stroke, and that brings up the dialog box. Or a simpler way is just making sure you have your layer selected, double click this negative space out here, double click on that layer, and that'll bring your layer style box up right away. Once you get to this point, there are many different options down here on the left hand side. These are all of your main options, and when you click one of these options, it'll bring up lots of other different options, sorry to keep using that word, for that particular layer style. So in this case, bevel and emboss, you can change the style, technique, the depth, size, and so forth. So the structure was at the top, and then the shading is down here at the bottom. You can play around with all these different options by yourself, but I'm going to just show you the main ones to give you an idea of how each of these particular layer styles work. So for the bevel and emboss, pretty much what it's going to do is it's going to make whatever layer you're on, it's going to make it look like it's popping out at you. So right now, like if I click on and off of this, you can see my cobras is changing. So with that selected, I'm going to go over here and make the size bigger. So now you can start to see what's going on. I'm going to change the technique to chisel hard. So now it starts to look like it's being carved into rock. I'm going to make my depth more, which brings in more contrast. Bring down my size a little bit. So you can play with these different options to get what you want. I'm not going to deal with shading, but you guys can play around with that later. So that is bevel and emboss. You can see the difference there. We already know about stroke. Stroke adds a line around your particular layer, so we're not going to go into depth about that. You can check and uncheck these boxes to hide or reveal whatever particular style you're using. So I'm just going to uncheck it so you can see what's going on with the others. The inner shadow casts a shadow from the right side down to the left side, and if you make this bigger, it'll grow. You can add more choke, meaning it's not so soft on the edges, it's a lot harder on the edges. And you can create the distance. So if you wanted a harsher, larger shadow, you can drag it more to the right or drag it to the left to make it smaller. You can change the color of your shadow too. If you wanted a navy shadow or blue to match your other ones, green, whatnot. Most shadows are darker, so I'm just going to leave it at black. You can also change the angle here. So right now the angle's coming from this direction. If I click over here, you can see my light source changes. So the direction of the shadow goes from the top left to the bottom right. So you can play around with that too. The inner glow is pretty self-explanatory. It casts a glow in the inside of your object all around all the edges. So you can see what that did there. You can change the color if you want as well. A lot of these are the same, choke, color, that kind of thing. I'm going to skip over satin. You guys can play with that if you want. Color overlay basically turns the whole thing to a color. So in this case it's red, or you can change it to whatever color you want to. So if you want to change that entire layer to a particular color, like if I was on my my snake layer, if I had added a color overlay, you know what, let's just do that. I'm going to go to my snake layer, double click, color overlay. You can see what it does. Changes the entire layer to that particular color. I'll go over the rest of these in the second tutorial.